Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jono White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, the most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jono White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up to just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to episode 33 of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Today's guest is Peter James. Peter is the Group CEO for SU Australia, a Christian not-for-profit organisation working with young people and families across Australia to bring God's love, hope and good news. SU has more than 1,200 staff and 8,000 active volunteers creating local community collaborations to deliver adventure experiences, school chaplaincy, training, Bible engagement and other programs across Australia. SU Australia was formed in 2021 by merging 9 organisations into a unified governance and leadership structure, and with a vision of growing the mission even further. Peter and his team are implementing a program of integration and expansion to build the movement into its full potential. In his 10 years with SU, Peter led SU's expansion of school chaplaincy in Queensland under federal funding and strengthening of the movement's other frontline ministries. Before SU, Peter was a telecommunications and technology partner of an international law firm. He is married with 5 adult children. Peter, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Oh, it's great to be with you.
So start off by giving us a bit of a window into SU Australia, and there's been some big changes this year. Obviously, we're recording this, we've just hit December in 2021, so the organisation itself has just brought 9 organisations together this year. So give us a bit of a window into SU Australia now and what it means to be Group CEO.
Yeah, well, SU itself is a very old organisation, and its history in Australia has been one of separate organisations in each state and territory, which served us really, really well for a long time. But over the last 5 years, there was a sense of what could we do better or what could we do more of if we were together. So that's set up a set of conversations over that 5-year period, and we drew closer together and reached the point prayerfully where we thought we should merge, and so we've joined 7 of the 8 SU movements together, and in New South Wales we've joined in with an organisation called Generate. So that's still fairly new, and as Group CEO, I sit over all of that, and my season is one of integration and ironing out all of the early problems to get it to a smooth, internally frictionless and organisation ready for growth.
Yeah, fantastic. That's a big achievement and a big process, and I think it's really exciting for the mission of SU across Australia. So tell us a bit about your story, Peter, and you can feel free to go back as far as you want.
Yeah, so I mean, I was born and raised in Brisbane, and had a wonderful childhood. I think sort of the stuff that I do now, leading an organisation that helps people who are children and young people, I think having such a positive childhood for me has given me just the sense that I would love to see others less fortunate also have great childhoods and overcome any disadvantage that might exist in their context or circumstance. A lot of key influences along my way. I mean, I had a really wonderful chaplain at the school that I went to, and I've always thought if I could have a chaplain like that in other schools to help kids the way I was helped, that would be a beautiful thing. But I also was an SU camp junkie in my childhood, and just loved that sense of transforming love of God, that and the adventure and fun that you can have on an SU camp. So I guess I was kind of wired or pre-programmed or set up to be part of SU, and I'd volunteered with them most of my life. So getting to where I am now, I think, is a lot of little pieces along the way, but I really just love SU and what it stands for, and it's such a privilege to be part of the next stage of its journey.
Yeah, that's wonderful that you've had such a long story with SU and such positive experiences. It's similar for me. I owe SU a lot actually because I really met my wife Liz on an SU camp. So we met at SU Schoolies,
Yeah.
which is a for those who might be outside of Australia, Schoolies is a time when people finish Year 12, and Scripture Union runs a few fantastic um, options for young people to go away with their friends and celebrate finishing school. So we went to the Sunshine Coast, and that's how I met Liz. So always
Nice.
mentioned in our story whenever we're telling people how we met. SU always gets a plug.
There's a former name of the organisation, or parts of it, was Children's Special Service Mission, or CSSM, but the letters CSSM are often sort of quoted as meaning "come single, soon married," which
Yeah,
sounds like it's your story.
yeah, that definitely was our story. Oh, that's fantastic. So, in terms of leading SU now, and I'm interested with your background as a lawyer. I guess starting there, what advantages have you found coming from law to leading a not-for-profit? Because they're obviously very different in some ways. They're really different things, but I'm guessing that there'd be a lot of what you did for a long time in the legal world that's actually been really important for you as a CEO of a not-for-profit.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because I mean I came in the start of my role 10 years ago, leading the Queensland part of the organisation. We were facing some challenges to our federal funding in the High Court, so the highest court of Australia. And everyone was said, "Oh, isn't it great that we've got a lawyer for this stage?" And I guess my legal background did make that easier than it might otherwise have been. Certainly, it wasn't sort of an unfamiliar environment or process for me. But I was not a constitutional lawyer, and it was a constitutional challenge. So I always
True.
kind of frowned to myself and thought, "Yeah, but that doesn't quite feel right." And when I reflected on it, I think what I did in my law career was, I mean, I negotiated transactions and deals.
Mm.
And so it was about trying to influence and understand where somebody else was and influence where they were to align more with wherever my clients' interests were and reach an outcome that felt mutually beneficial. So really, my role in law was about producing sort of an agreed sense of advantage and change. Now, in law, of course, that became a document. In an organisation, it becomes a strategic direction. And so I think more than anything, that's the background that I bring, the capacity to see where something needs to be and to understand how we can run a process of bringing people along towards that endpoint.
Yeah, I like how you've made the link there between working and I guess the thing that would be in common is that a lot of people may not think of with law is that when you're dealing with those transactions, it's really a lot about the people involved and communication, which is exactly the same for leadership. So much of leadership, like you just said, there is around leading people and helping people. I guess working out a strategic direction together, and then moving with them to go towards that direction.
Yeah, and look, that's as much about understanding where they are and why, as understanding where your sense of where we need to be and why. So, I love Jack Welch's sort of comments as a leader, and one of the things he talks about is that the leader is the chief meaning officer. And he says, look, where are we going and why, and and how do you help people understand it's there to their advantage, what's in it for them to
Mm.
come along. And I guess my legal career was about doing precisely that. So where is the other party that we're negotiating with? What do they want, and why do they want that? What does my client need or want, and how do I bring those things together through a process of discussion and negotiation? And when you get to a leadership role, it is different. There's a lot different about the context and the way a law firm works and the way lawyers work from the way a not-for-profit works. And I think the new thing I learned was people in the not-for-profit world do things because they believe in them,
Mm.
not because they're told to do them. And so much of what the leader's role is casting that vision and trying to help people understand themselves and where they are and where the organisation needs to be, and asking a lot of sort of what if questions. What if it looked like that, or imagine if we could do this, and igniting in something already in them
Mm.
about a change that the organisation wants to bring.
Yeah, that's great. Any thoughts on, I guess, if you were to sit down with a young leader who might be listening and scribbling notes going, yes, vision, I know I need to cast vision. Gee, I've heard that before, but how do I do that? What advice would you give to leaders out there to cast vision effectively?
Yeah, I do talk to a lot of young leaders, and I think the ones that we have this phrase we use called peeps with potential.
Mm.
And I guess what you're looking for in that young leader is someone who has a sense of, developing sense, but a sense of who they are, but also want they want to change, or they want to do something positive.
Mm.
I've spoken to people who, you say, oh, what do you want to, what do you want? What do you think your future looks like? And they say, I want to be a leader, but they actually don't have any sense of what change they want to bring. They actually don't have a vision, or
Yes.
sometimes a vision starts with a dissatisfaction,
Mm-hmm.
and dissatisfaction is as good a start as anywhere, because that leads to, well, maybe I can bring some change. But I think the most important thing for a young leader is to have a picture about what they'd like to see different. That in effect is a vision.
Yeah.
And if there's something that they want to see different, it doesn't really matter so much what it is. Hopefully it's a positive thing. It will ignite them into some form of action, and they will learn about what it means to bring people with them. Rarely we can do things by ourselves, but leadership is about how do you coalesce people around a common sense of purpose and direction,
Yes.
and make it compelling and enjoyable and satisfying for them to be part of that journey.
Yeah, I think that's a great breakdown of vision, and I think we overcomplicate vision. I think you're right. It's, if you're not sure, if you don't feel like you have a clear vision for something that you're in a leadership role in a team or an organization, just thinking about what you'd like to be different. And then I feel like one of the easiest handles for leaders is to use stories. What stories are there that have already happened that represent the vision? And that's what I love about not-for-profits, is an organization like SU has so many stories. And in those stories, I find those stories have the DNA of the vision of the organization in them, even though that might be articulated differently, and then strategically it might be a big shift, and then you merge with other organizations or other representations. But the DNA in those stories, when you come back to why your organization and why your team is doing what it's doing, when you find those really great stories, they always seem to, you share one and you'll see people have the light bulb moments. That's been a
Yeah.
bit of an aha moment for me, when I realized, oh, actually, I don't have to. It's not that complicated. Just know what needs to be different. If you're going to start somewhere, know what needs to be different. Find some stories already in your organizational team where that's happened. Share those and talk about that, and then
Yeah.
you can work on clarifying it. But that's a great place to start.
And often it's not even necessarily a big thing. So in the SU history, there's a story of a 19-year-old woman called Annie Marsden, who, it was sort of in the era where children were seen but not heard. And the sort of theory of the child was that they were a future adult, rather than having sort of inherent sort of being in themselves. But Annie loved reading the Bible. Annie loved the scripture, and she'd had an experience of a God who loved her. And she thought, well, wouldn't it be great if kids could also have that? And she started writing out Bible verses on cards.
Mm,
Well, that became a global Bible reading movement. And it began by a 19-year-old woman writing some stuff on cards for kids that she knew. So it
mm,
can start small, but it will steamroll. So you'll do something small and you'll go, well, that worked, or maybe it didn't work, but it could work.
mm.
And then the next thing is, well, what if? And then the next step, and then the next step. So, but I love the momentum that comes from beginning. And
Yes.
I think it's important, if you can see a change, however small, begin it and see what happens after that.
Yeah, that's great. If you can see a change, however small, begin it. I like that. As you reflect back on your journey so far as a leader, what moments come to mind that you think have really shaped you, been very significant in playing a part in you becoming Peter James, the leader you are today?
Yeah, there's a lot of little moments, I think, that sort of lead you to a point where you start to do bigger things. I mean, when I think, I mean, so at school, I had a leading role in my sport. That was gave me a sense that it gave me a sense of responsibility. So the sport is not a particularly common sport, was rowing, and I was stroke of an 8, and that means you're setting the pace for the boat. And if you're not fit enough, or if you don't read the race correctly, everyone's following your rhythm, everyone's following your pace. and you can either lead that to a winning medal around your neck, or you can come fourth. When fourth is a terrible place to come because you're so close but so far. And so I guess I learned from the sport context that it wasn't like I was out the front. By definition, the stroke of the boat's at the back. But people are watching you and taking their pace from you. And I guess I learned that. In the law firm, I learned about what putting a team together might look like and how to use different facets of strength in a team. And all the way along was my experience with children and young people as a SU camper, and as a parent. And I reached a point where I thought, well, I just wish I could be part of that full time. And the opportunity came up, and I went from a law firm to a not for profit salary. I took a 90% pay cut to take that job, but felt like I won the lottery because I was doing something I was passionate about. I was doing something that would make a positive change in young people's lives. And I still, it's 10 years on, and I'm still pinching myself that I get to do this. It's fantastic.
That's incredible, and I think that's such a great story for young leaders to hear as well, because when you are in those, particularly in the younger years, and you're looking ahead and you are looking at all the options, and there's all the sparkle of different options. I think sometimes it's great to reflect and hear someone like yourself who's had that, and I had that wonderful opportunity in the law in the law world and done incredible things there. But for you, the calling and the passion to lead something like SU. Some people would say, "Hey, that doesn't make sense. Why would you take a 90% pay cut and feel like you hit the lottery?" But I think that's such a wonderful lesson for all of us to remember, is that if that's where you're meant to be and what God's called you to do and what you're meant to be doing, then, and if that's the passion and the desire that I think he puts in us, then it makes it so worthwhile.
Yeah. Money is a common motivator for people, and look, I'm not trying to say I'm a saint or anything, but just genuinely felt so much joy and pleasure from making a positive contribution, rather than structuring a good transaction. When I'm an old man, sort of leaning on a walking stick, I'm not going to be thinking about the good contracts I drew up. I'm going to be thinking about the stories of the young lives who were transformed. You don't wish you spent more time at work. You always go to the personal things when you reflect back. And for me, I get to do that as, there's an alignment between my gifting and skill and my passion and my sense of calling. And when all of those things line up, it's deeply satisfying.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question about, I guess, your reflections on your leadership journey so far. Is there anything that comes to mind where you think, in hindsight, you made a mistake or dropped the ball there, but it was something that you really learnt from, and it's been a really important sort of key sort of learning moment for you?
Yeah, yeah. I've made loads of mistakes, and the trouble as a leader, of course, is that it's usually other people that pay for your mistakes. So,
Yeah, that's
but
true.
one that springs to mind, yeah, that's just the unfortunate truth. It's others that pay for your mistake. But one that springs to mind, we had a camp right very early in my time as a leader, and there was a boy. It was just a freak water skiing accident, and a boy got a terrible head injury and was ambulanced to hospital. And we have really amazing safety management and critical incident systems, and people who are well trained in that stuff. And so, this was a camp. My role was, to be notified early so that I would be aware of it, and to sort of help the team as they did their job. And and part of our process included having someone with the family at the hospital. So we had that base covered, but the boy had surgery, he recovered. That's the good part of the story, and all of our systems really operated precisely as they should have. It was a success story in that sense. But for me, I realized when I met with the family a couple of weeks after the boy was out of surgery and recovering, that they felt that we'd let them down because the organisation wasn't there to journey with them. Now, we had someone at the hospital journeying with them, but it wasn't the CEO. It
Yeah.
wasn't the person who represented, in their mind, the leader. And and so for me, that was a real lesson. I mean, I was doing what I thought was right, as in empowering the team and staying out of their way so they could do what they wanted to do. But there was this extra dimension that I hadn't thought of, which was the effectively sort of chief chaplain of the organisation,
Yeah.
to be in the moments of crisis with the people most affected by that crisis. And so I learned that the hard way by wounding that family who felt I hadn't cared. Now, in fact, I'd been praying and been on the phone and caring deeply, but I wasn't with them. And presence is an important part of leadership, and I learned that lesson through that experience.
Yeah, I so appreciate you sharing that, and I appreciate your vulnerability because I think I absolutely resonate with the challenge and with how you reflected. And what I'm hearing is that there was a sense of, okay, I need to be involved, but almost to get out of the way and let your people really do. But you realize, oh wait, my presence there in that room would have been was actually really crucial. And I think this is something that I find really challenging, and a lot of leaders I chat with struggle with this. Is often that we are where we shouldn't be. We've got our fingers
Right.
in things, and we're turning up, and it's like, actually you need to get out of the way there. Like, we need to stop being a bottleneck there. And then at the same time, and I know I think back on different roles where I've been in, where I see this 100%, where I'm involved in some things that I think, now I should have gotten out of the way and just not even been there for that and let that happen. And then other things where you go, actually that's something that I did get out of the way, or that I really, now in hindsight, it should have been there.
Yeah.
I guess as you reflect, what advice would you give to leaders around, because this is one of those things you can prepare, but when something like that happens, no matter how important, no matter how great your critical incident processes are, which is sort of the first box to tick, right? You need to make sure those things are there. But as a leader, what advice now
Yeah.
in hindsight would you give? How would you go about that differently um, if you were doing it today?
Yeah. I think, look, I learned the lesson I needed to learn in that experience. And again, it wasn't me that paid the price of that. The family, I should have been there. I mean, I'm a lawyer. It's not, if I'm giving counseling advice, people are really in trouble. So it wasn't that it was anything that I needed to say to them.
Yes.
It's just the sheer presence of the leader of this organization that has damaged my child. Again, freak accident,
Hmm.
unavoidable accident. But they damaged my child. Where's the boss? Why isn't he here with us?
Yeah.
And that's a good question. That's a fair question. And we'd put someone with them in the room, someone who was more skilled than I am at that stuff. But just being there would have said to them, the most important thing in your life at the moment is your injured boy,
Yes.
and that's the most important thing to us as well. And so I think as a leader, you learn those things, and you sometimes you feel you've got them right. A lot of times you feel you've got them wrong, and you learn from that.
Yes.
So it's zooming in and out the whole time. So sometimes you need to be in the room and helping clear a bottleneck for somebody, and then quickly get out of the way. Sometimes you need to avoid the meeting altogether so that the people who should be running it do run it and step up. And there are some advice I give to some of our leaders, that where I say, look, are you going to those meetings? Because you probably shouldn't. If you weren't in that meeting, other people would run the meeting and they would learn from it.
Yes.
You would be growing them as leaders. Your sheer presence in that room is restricting them as leaders. So it's there's a wisdom, you learn a wisdom as you go, and often by making mistakes.
Yeah, the idea of presence is so significant. I was chatting with a wonderful school leader here in Queensland a while back, and I can't remember the book he mentioned. So I want to on that came from someone else. I just can't remember the name of the book, but he was talking about a book he'd read around. I think it was specifically for educators, but it was around the different forms of presence for a leader and the different forms of visibility. And I just thought that's such a great perspective. Talking about the formal, there's the formal visibility, which is in a school, it's the giving that presentation at awards night. But there's the, I think, informal presence, and one of my favorite things I saw when I was turning up to work with a client that's actually another school here in Brisbane, and I saw the principal, and this is a really large school, and I saw him doing the lollipop, holding the stop sign on the crossing. And I thought, oh, I just wasn't expecting his face to be there as I waited in the car to while parents and kids crossed. And then I realized, I thought, okay, and I found out I think he does that once a week. And I realized he has
Nice.
intentionally positioned himself somewhere. The layout of the school, basically, every single parent and student has to cross that one crossing. It's where the car park is, and then they cross that, and then they go to wherever they're going. And so he's positioned himself for 45 minutes to be able to interact with every
Nice.
child and every parent. And I just thought that is such smart
Yeah, it is.
leadership, and such, like you said, that wisdom that comes from experience. To go, normally you'd go, oh no, I don't have time for that because I've got, someone else could do that. But there were reasons where he was positioning himself there, and also because I know he's a really servant-hearted leader. I think it was a way as well to say there's nothing too, there's nothing too low for any of us to do, and we'll all pick up whatever we need to do to help. And it just was a number of things where I thought that is actually just wonderful leadership.
Yeah, I think if he was there every day, that would have been a problem. It's a matter of knowing. It's this phrase I use is zooming in and out. So you zoom
Mm,
in, so people see you, know that you value them, you're listening, you hear them, but you also need to get out of the room sometimes so they can get on with their stuff. I love to go to our chaplain in service days when I can, and that's a practical thing. They're coming together, and it's an easy way to see a lot of people at once.
yes.
And very often, I don't have anything to say. I'm just there and joining in for a couple of hours. But typically, I'll go for the first part of the session, and then I'll leave because they can relax and be themselves and not feel like the boss is looking over their shoulder. And to be honest, I get so much from that. I get to hear the conversations, hear what's concerning them. I get to affirm and express my appreciation for them in an informal way, and then I'm out of their hair and they can enjoy the day without me. But zoom in and out.
I like that, zooming in and out and being strategic. Something that I've done with a number of leaders who are very task driven is I've worked with them around how to realize that they're often very down on themselves because they're so task driven and they feel like uh,
Right,
you know they're not great with people, and they can be real, and I love to say, what, you got to leverage your task your ability with a to-do list, and realize that connecting with people is in and of itself, it is actually a task. It's something you can do. It's actually something you can get better at. It's
right,
something you can plan
yeah,
strategically. And one of the most helpful things that I've seen, which sounds so ridiculously simple, but is actually to help leaders who might be really task driven to actually add into their to-do list, add into their routine, strategic places they're going to be visible, and strategic connection routine to actually, if someone's really, really task driven, and for them, we're really working on how can we make ourselves more accessible and really build our connection with our people. It might be to actually have a list of the key people that you want to build connection with, and to log and actually make an effort to go and spend a few minutes checking in, that's not project related and not task related.
right, yeah.
And I like that idea of zooming in,
That's,
because it's like, for them, it was an epiphany to go, because there's different types of zooming in and zooming out. But I love how strategic you are with that chaplain day with attending, because like you said, it all comes back to the wisdom of sometimes you're zooming out and you need to be zooming in, and sometimes you're zooming in and you actually need to get out of there. And some of that, I guess, just
Yeah.
comes from experience.
Yeah, and look, I get far more from it, from going along and filling up, from me being there than I'm sure they get from me being there. But it's a great opportunity. It's a really small thing. I think the other thing too, I was reflecting the other day, when you read the Gospels, how many of the really great stories came from an unintended interruption in Jesus' schedule. So it's
Mm,
great to have the schedule. But, when you think about, the blind man yelling out, Jesus, have mercy, that was an
mm,
interruption to the day. Jesus was going somewhere, or Zacchaeus up the tree, like that was an interruption. And yet it became an incredible moment. And I think as a leader, being aware that sometimes the most powerful moment might be the interruption, and
yes.
being attuned to that. You won't always get that right, but sometimes the interruption is the best thing in your day, not for you, but for somebody else. The fact that they interrupted or you got interrupted
Mm.
leads to the greatest change.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful, Peter. Jesus was very interruptible, wasn't he?
Yeah,
And on the
yeah, and he
most
put he
important
held
mission.
his schedule lightly.
Yeah. I think I'm just laughing because I think of how often as leaders you go, oh, but I've got really important things I need to do, which is valid and true. But you think about Jesus and how interruptible he was, and the mission he was on, and yet he was so interruptible. I think it's a wonderful challenge to like everything when you look at his life is to go, oh, he wasn't hurried. He was so interruptible. He um, he was so
He was
gentle.
strategic though as well.
Yes, yeah,
You,
you're
you know,
right.
the
Yeah,
interruptions often came as part of a plan. He was going on a journey from X to Y, and he had his disciples with him, and the interruption became a teaching moment for them. So the
yes,
schedule might have been interrupted, but actually his purpose wasn't. His overall big picture intention wasn't. The interruption became part of the overall narrative, and that's because he's Jesus and we're not. But I guess as leaders, we have the same opportunity that, if all you're doing is responding to interruptions, you'll only ever be reactive.
yes,
But just to have that mindset that sometimes that interruption is the God moment in your day.
yeah. That's wonderful, and I really like that actually. The idea that being interruptible, that's on purpose, that's actually still on mission, and that's the reflection is strategic. And another podcast episode I did, I can't remember who it was actually, but they talked about open door policy, and I loved what they said. They said, the open door policy. There are some leaders who say, "Oh yeah, I have an open door policy," and you say, "What do you mean?" Well, I physically have my door open. They say, "Well, that's not really the idea. The idea is how comfortable and how often do your people feel like when they need to, they can walk through that door and actually say, I've got something that I really need your help with." And I thought that's
Yeah,
that's the difference, isn't it? It's like it's turning, and I think that's such a big challenge of leadership is turning the ideas that are true. Like open door policy is a wonderful idea, but what does it look like to live that out? Being interruptible is a wonderful idea,
yeah,
but like you said, if you're just interruptible all the time, then you stop being on mission because you're not achieving anything.
yeah. Look, I'll sort of Jack Welch again. One of the other things he talks about a leader is that they're the chief clutter clearer, and I really love that phrase. There are some things where people get stuck, and they're perfectly capable leaders. They may have even constructed some solutions, but they just need someone to help get some impediment out of the way. And as the leader, you're the
Yes.
one that can do that. And it doesn't matter whether you're the CEO or in another leadership role. I think that clutter clearing is part of the role. How do you make this easier for people? What's the thing that everyone barks their shin on in the organisation, or
Yeah,
everyone avoids that pothole. Well, why don't you as leader take the thing away that's barking the shin, or fill in the pothole for them,
that's great.
and then get out of their way again and let them do their thing.
Yeah, I love that so much because I think it's actually a really good filter for how effectively you're leading. Is to, if I could go and sit down with the people who are being led by the listeners out there and say to them, is so if I'm leading a team, does Jono make your life easier or harder by as your leader? And I think it's a
Yeah,
great filter because great leadership is exactly that. It's getting things out of the way for people, making their life easier. And the thing I love about that as well, and to be honest, this is probably the biggest learning I've had from this podcast. And I feel like I'm probably getting the most out of this podcast than anyone because it's just so much fun getting to hear leaders tell their stories. And the biggest thing that comes up again and again and again, and I hear it with what you've just unpacked there, is this. I've always heard of the upside down leadership, rather than the leader being on top, the
right.
leader being on the bottom, and the upside down triangle where and I love that, but it's always never been quite real to me. I've always thought it's a good idea, but how do you not just have that on the wall? And this
Yeah,
podcast so far, the thing that stood out most to me is this idea of great leaders don't look for support and to be served by their people. They actually think upside down, and they view their role as, how can I support and serve this team? And that word support as well, I know
right.
servant leadership, I love servant leadership, but actually saying to yourself as a leader, what can I do to support my people today? And even saying to them, how can I support you, is such a powerful shift. And it's really been a bit of an aha moment for me, actually, from doing this podcast.
Yeah, it's a great question. How can I support you? I think sometimes that's too big a question, because people don't have a sense of what their leader can do to support them.
Yes.
Other questions that I found quite useful is, look, what's not working for you at the moment?
Yeah, that's
Because
great.
everyone will have a list of those things. And sometimes it's stuff that they feel is insoluble. It just is. But the real thing that really annoys me, or the thing that's slowing me down is, or the thing that I just can't ever seem to overcome, or a recurrent problem we have is, everyone will have something like that. And as a leader, that's something you can fix. It's often something that has multi factors, and the person you're talking to doesn't control any of them, or only controls some of them. But as a leader, you've got all of those tools in your hands.
Yes.
If there's something not working between teams, if there's a system or a tool or a process or a procedure or a policy, something, maybe boring and mundane like that isn't working, that's something you can work on. How can I make it easier for you to fulfill your purpose in this organization? That's a very big question, but it will
Mm.
probably chunk down to, what's annoying you at the moment? How can I fix? What can I fix for you?
Yes, that's great, and that's a great question. What's not working for you at the moment? What's the biggest roadblock for you right now? What's the thing annoying you most right now? And another one I heard, which I think comes from a book around that's called rounding, or round, which is this idea of going to your team and actually going and doing the rounds. I think it's called rounding. It's something like that. But I've worked with a leader who used this, and so I just remember them saying one of the questions that you would do in your rounds every day, checking in with your people, and really just encouraging that consistent communication and asking people questions, is what's one thing I could do to make your work easier today? So focusing it in on something small as well. Like what's one thing,
Yeah,
and like you said, the only issue with that is that they may not know what you could do. So it might be, instead of what's one thing I could do, what's one thing that might be small, but if we could change that, would make a big difference in your world today. And
yeah.
realizing that
And
a lot of
sometimes
days,
that small
maybe not.
question, yeah,
Sorry.
sometimes that small question turns into a very big question. So,
Yes.
I remember years ago asking, what's something we could fix, and the answer was, well, our finance system. So, um, that's a very big project, and you know, I know there are things that people have said to me in the past, and 6 years later, I get back to them and say, "Hey, I think we finally got there. Do you remember that time you said X?" And you know, so I think also reflecting back with people to say, look, where have we come from? You know, at the
Mm,
moment, we're, you know, merging 9 organisations together, and we're only 6 months in. So, you know, there's a lot of there's a lot of messy stuff still. You know, we're still trying to integrate and combine so many things.
yeah.
And there's a lot of people. I'll give you two analogies. One is that, you know, we're kind of living in the house while we renovate it, and I've said to the team, living in the house when you renovate it, we pulled the kitchen out and we're cooking on a camp stove, and that
Yeah.
is an annoying thing. Except we know we're getting a new kitchen soon, and so you live with a certain level of reduced capacity during a process of change if there's a shared vision for what the end point of that change is and why it's better. And so that sort of renovation analogy is helpful for us at the moment. But the other, for a person leading a team who is, you know, the phrase that we use is, look, you're feeling the leg burn. We're climbing steeply on sometimes a slope where the sand moves under your feet and you don't feel like you're achieving quite the rate that you want to. And I've said to some of our leaders, look, turn around and look at the view. Look how far we've climbed already. And so
Mm,
having those points in time where as leader you help people to reflect and contextualize and understand, you know, in the business of where they are, understand where we've come from and actually remind them where we're going, and encourage them to pause and rest and do the same for their team and celebrate what we've achieved even though we're not finished yet. That's an important thing. You know, again, being sort of chief cheer squad and meaning officer is an important thing.
yeah, I like that. Chief cheerleader, chief meaning officer. They're wonderful reminders for leaders. I have to say, one of the simplest stories I've ever heard about, and I can't remember where I heard it because I'd love to be able to honor where it came from, but is around vision. It actually might have been in an Andy Stanley book. Visioneering could have been in there, and there's just this little parable around. There were two people. A man came across two people moving rocks from one place to another, and he said to one of them, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Oh, they said sort of frustrated and tired. I'm moving rocks from here to there, and then coming back here and getting more and moving them over there." And he said, "Okay." And then he turned to the other person and said, because still confused about what they're doing, he said, "What are you doing?" And the person said, "I'm building a castle." And
Yeah, right. Yeah.
just that, or we're building a castle. Just that picture of realizing that they're both doing the same thing, but casting vision is that ability to help people realize that, because if you're going to be moving blocks from here to there, that's hard work. And if you don't see the castle and you just feel like you're moving blocks from here to there, then who wants to do that? But if you can help people realize this is what we're
Yeah.
building, this is what it's going to look like. And like you said, the missing piece from that
Yeah.
parable is where we've been and where we come from. Then it's easy to see why someone would get excited about being part of that. Or we're building a castle. That's something amazing.
Yeah, and the leader's role in helping, even people who should and do understand that, but at points of time just need to be given the space, permissioned, or even sort of muscled into a place where they can reflect backwards, look forwards,
Yes.
pause,
Yeah.
take a breath. I remember hearing the story of JFK visiting Cape Canaveral, I think it was, or in the early days, he never got to see the end point of the moon landings, of course, but in the early days of that process of building, and he as the story ran, he saw a guy in overalls and said, "What's your job here?" And he said to the president, "My job is to put a man on the moon." Now, in fact, the guy was a janitor, and his day-to-day task was to empty bins and sweep floors.
Yeah.
But he saw his job, like your castle analogy, he saw his job as putting a man on the moon. Now, if every person in an organization understands we're putting a man on the moon in a not-for-profit, particularly a Christian not-for-profit, if
Yeah.
everyone understands the purpose of the mission and feels a sense of connection and pride about their contribution to that. I'd love everyone in my organisation to feel like they're putting a man on the moon.
Yeah, yeah. Anything practical that you found helps people to remember they're putting a man on the moon and not focus on the floor they're mopping? Obviously different tasks and
Yeah.
different outcome, but anything you found helpful for helping people turn their eyes and keep in mind the deeper purpose of what they're doing and what they're part of?
Well, I think the compelling vision in a form that's easily articulated by everyone is an important part of that. And so there's that sort of straight line you need to draw between the missional purpose of the organisation, the vision about where we're going, and I love that is a ridiculously impossible vision. It has to be an inspiring and possibly unachievable vision, but we're all excited about taking the first few steps towards that and creating the start of a momentum. Having a sense of that mission, having a compelling vision that everyone in the organisation can name, and then working that through into what your strategy looks like. And each person will have a sense of their piece of that. Some of it might be quite granular tasks, but the sense of the reason I'm moving this rock or the reason I'm creating this spreadsheet is
Yeah.
because we want to all go there together. And so a lot of that is working with people and teams and making sure every leader in the organisation has that same sense of buy-in, but
Yes.
better than buy-in, excitement, and helping their people to constantly connect what might be an unexciting part of their day into that ultimate purpose and give it meaning.
Yeah, that's well said. And as we sort of start wrapping up, I'm always interested in books or podcasts that people are loving. Are there any, I guess starting with books, are there any books that if you look back, you tend to gift to people more often than others? That it's your go-to, or a few go-to books that you would give someone around business leadership or really any topic?
It's a bit of an odd one, but there's a book called Leading with a Limp. I can't remember this guy's surname. James Allen. Anyway, Leading with a Limp. I should look that up for you. But it's a really interesting book about leading through vulnerability. And I think as a
Dan
leader,
Allender?
the
Is it
thing I
Dan
like
Allender?
about yes,
Yes.
yes, thank you. The thing I like about that is uh, the sense of being honest with yourself about your vulnerabilities and with others.
Yes.
And this is what I like about Christian servant leadership is that you
Yes.
don't have to be the hero. You're the
Mm,
leader, but you're led. You're led by someone else as the leader. You're all following the Lord Jesus Himself in His mission, and so that gives a sense of should give a sense of humility that no matter who in the organisation you're talking to, they're just as called as I am,
yes.
and their role is just as important as mine, and I know my frailties. I think the thing that Leading with a Limp taught me was the ability to be really honest and about your vulnerabilities and your
Mm,
failures. Not always go there. There are times people need to know their leader knows what we're doing, for example. But
yeah.
if you don't know what you're doing, we'll hopefully work it out. But be honest. Look, we're trying this. We've not been this way before. We're trying it. So in our merger, we've never merged this SU organisation into a national set of organisations. We've never done that before, and so we were looking at together as a group with when the Israelites passed over the Jordan to enter the Promised Land. There's this beautiful part of that passage in Joshua, where Joshua says, follow the priests and the ark, because we've never been this way. They're following God. We don't know which way we're going. Let's follow Him. There's a vulnerability to that, and I think that's one thing I really love about that book.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. Any other shows, podcasts, anything else that you're really loving at the moment as a source and a resource around leadership or just for life in general?
I love sort of scrounging things. Breno Brown's got some really good stuff about, daring to lead, and there's a lot of she's very Texan in that, and but she's got a really good program, really good sort of ideas around leading. I really enjoyed reading that, and then I'll scrounge anything. I voraciously scrounging. I've referenced Jack Welch a few times.
Yes.
There's a lot of wisdom in a lot of places. Read widely, listen widely.
I agree. Brene Brown has I don't know how new it is. It might still be classified as new podcast, which is fantastic, where she interviews leaders. And so that's something that I've discovered recently for any Brene Brown fans out there. And that might be something you're interested in too, Peter, because it's sort of you're getting to hear Brene's thoughts, but also overlaid with the stories of other leaders, a bit like what we do here on this podcast. So that's
Yeah,
another
yeah.
that's another good resource. Did you have any final thoughts for listeners?
Just if you've got an idea, begin it. I had this quote on my wall for a long time, which had Goethe's name underneath it. And before this podcast, I was just reminded of it, and I thought I'd research it. Turns out it wasn't Goethe at all. But there's a lot of quote references to it. It's by a guy called William Hutchison Murray, and he starts off by going, until you're committed, there's hesitancy. And then the passage continues on, whatever you can do or dream you can do, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. Begin it now. And I think, that's not an encouragement not to plan, but getting started, even on that small thing, if you see it, start it, and it'll create a momentum that leads to other things. So that's my encouragement. Start something, begin something. The thing that's on your heart, start it.
Yeah, that's a great encouragement. And I can't remember where I saw it or heard it recently, but there was something about starting and realizing from day one that even actually looking at failure and viewing failure as a learning and saying, I need to start. And even if it fails, that's actually an important part of the journey, because I will learn from that. And so there's sort of there's often very little downside in starting somewhere and starting something, because no matter what happens, you learn from it. And I think it's a particular book, actually, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it's about this idea. And the thing I loved about it is they're saying, you know what, when you do your first, if you I can't remember if they talked about this, but if you do cooking and you try the first time, it might be disgusting. It might taste terrible.
Will be if
It
I'm
might
doing
be
it.
an authentic failure. This is speaking
Yeah,
from experience. I'm trying to get into it a bit more, and that's part of the process. And that is, if you want to be able to cook something really delicious at some point, then cooking terribly now and failing at that particular dish is actually a necessary part of the process. And so why do we get so caught up in starting something with an idea that then doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't take off, or we close it down, and we go, oh, that was a failure? It's like, well, actually that was a learning that I wouldn't be able to
yeah.
take the next step if I hadn't done that. So that's wonderful advice. And anyone listening, maybe there's something you need to start. So that's great. And I just want to thank our listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I have just loved today's episode. I think you would have gotten a lot out of it. And don't forget, we have 2 other podcasts. We have the John O'White Leadership Podcast, where I just give you content around leadership. The one that I did most recently is answering the question, or my opinion on the question, to be honest: are leaders born, or can they be made? And so I've done an episode on that. And then Leadership Question of the Day, where I put a stone in your shoe and give you a different uncomfortable question to wrestle with every day to grow as a leader. And last of all, today, I just want to say a massive thank you, Peter. It's been just such a joy. Appreciate, as you've just talked about towards the end there, but really have appreciated your vulnerability as a leader. And it's just been so much fun to talk about leadership and to, I guess, also wrestle together with some of these things around vision and around zooming in and out. It's been a very rich conversation. So thank you so much for coming on.
It's been a real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast as much as I did. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, including our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from all over the world in all different roles, in different industries, answer these 7 questions on leadership, and leaders give these in-depth answers around how they spend their time, a book that's been significant for them. It's just a gold mine. It's completely free to access, so go to consultclarity.org and look for that. We'd also love to interview you about your leadership. I believe your experience, your life, your context means that you have advice on leadership that other leaders can learn from. Yes, you, if you're going, not me, well, no, I really believe you would have something to add. So if you're looking for a way to give back, it's completely free to get involved. And we would love to interview you through the 7 Questions on Leadership. You just go to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form and get involved. We have a free resource on our website called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook, 10 world-class leaders giving their thoughts on leadership, and that's completely free. It's available on our homepage, consultclarity.org, right at the top, so make sure you go and get that and download it today. And we have a free daily email that you can subscribe to. We send this out to over 15,000 leaders from around the world. And it contains the highlights of content from our podcasts, our blogs, our books we're reading. It's got the best content, and it gives you exclusive, limited, early access to our masterclasses, workshops, new products, special offers. It's all for our subscribers. You can go to consultclarity.org/subscribe and join 15,000 other leaders. And you know, my gift to you is to work really hard, particularly through the Leadership Conversations podcast. I have been blown away by the quality of the leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone in doing these interviews. So I'm having a great time. And my gift to you is to keep lining up the best leaders I can to invest in your leadership. Your gift to me, if you're finding this helpful, there is something that you could do that would help us out massively. And that is to write a review and to leave a rating for our podcast or wherever you're watching or listening to this. I can't tell you how much that helps us out. Also, subscribe or follow. It really does make a difference in helping us to help more leaders become everything they're meant to be. Another thing that means a lot to me personally is when I see our community share our content. So if you do share this or any other piece of content on social media, then thank you, and please do that. And look for me, Jono White, or Clarity, and tag us in your post. Our team is always looking for posts to engage with from our community, and there's also a chance that we'll share your content to go beyond and share it with our followers. Last of all, you can check out my book. It's called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because 50% of the coaching sessions I have with leaders, this topic comes up again and again and again. And it's this idea of, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I lead this person better when I'm finding them difficult? Or in some cases, you look and you say, I think I might be leading a difficult person. They're just quite difficult to lead, or I'm finding them quite difficult to lead. So there's a 3-step process that I unpack in Step Up or Step Out. And the amazing thing, and I've literally done this myself, and I've heard it anecdotally from other leaders as I've coached them, is that if you follow this process, you will see that person step up and change their behavior or make a decision, which is to step out some of the time. 95% of the time, people will step up or step out in just 4 weeks. And I stand by that. It's you have to read the book to understand, but I really do believe in it, and I've experienced it firsthand. It works. So you can go to Amazon, look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or store.consultclarity.org/book. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode next time of the Leadership Conversations podcast. And I hope today has helped you to take another step towards becoming the leader you're meant to be. See you next time.